So listen, let me share my screen. I want to tell you a little story as part of our show and tell here of a find that I recently found. An interesting shipwreck cover, just mixed in a little bit of a lot here, and I'm going to share it and show it to you. And I want to take you down a little path. And so let me share. And it is a story about the SS Tahiti. Let me go to full screen mode. I trust that everybody can see that. And just say yes if you can. Thank you.
Yes, looks good.
Thank you. Perfect. Good. So I just found this, and I'm going to go through the history of the SS Tahiti, her history, her sinking, and a salvaged cover. And here on the front is a picture of what eventually would become the SS Tahiti. This is what it was first built, and it was, I forget the name. I'll go through what the name is in a minute. But this was just something that came up while I was looking. I didn't really think. Somebody presented a few weeks ago, and I think it was George. You never know what you're going to find in an envelope. And in a collection that I had, just a box of random material, was an old cardboard envelope that I don't think had been looked at in probably 30 or 40 years. And so while I was going through this, I opened the envelope, and lo and behold, inside was what I'm going to present today. And I started to do a little research. And again, it goes to what's amazing, what you can find if you know how to search our web and our internet and have references. And so let me take you through this little story here, and we'll see how it goes. And you can interrupt me, of course, anytime as we're going. So I want to tell you about the history of the SS Tahiti before we get to the actual cover. This was an ocean liner operated by the Union Steamship Company of New Zealand, and it was afloat for 26 years. It was built in 1904 by the Alexander Stephen and Sons Company. Oh, and here's the original name of the ship. It was originally called the RMS Port Kingston, and it was named that until 1911 when it was renamed the Tahiti. It was a passenger ship, and it carried about 515 passengers. That was between first class and second in steerage. It had about 115 members of the crew. It, for our purposes, carried mail, a lot of mail, and it also had a large cargo hold, which predominantly carried fruit. This ship has a pretty long history of surviving a number of events. As I started to do the research on this, I was surprised to see. In 1907, while it was in Kingston, Jamaica, there was a major earthquake, and it was beached. That large ship I showed you was beached, and it was refloated, and it survived that event. In 1914, it served as a troop ship during World War I. It was named, as I have there, HMNZT, His Majesty's New Zealand Transport. That's what that stands for. And so it spent a number of years moving troops around, and there's a lot of details behind the activity that it did see during World War I. What is kind of relevant for what we're experiencing now in our pandemic, that I think is very relevant, is in 1918, it was subject to a Spanish influenza outbreak on the ship after stopping in Sierra Leone. And it had a very high mortality rate of troops on board, 77 out of 1,000, and I think even afterwards a few others had passed. So it experienced that. And again, ship out at sea, a few people that while they didn't go on land, they had loaded up the ship with some supplies from the local people there who had they brought on the Spanish influenza and it spread. And so, again, I don't know that they were wearing masks, but they should have been, and it spread like wildfire. In 1919, after they survived that outbreak of flu, and they really had a large loss of life there, it was returned to the owners and converted from coal firing to oil. And so now this ship, and I'm going to give you a little more history. What happened in 1927, is that now it is named the Tahiti. It collided with the ferry, the Grey Cliff, in Sydney Harbor in Australia. And this crowded ferry was split in two and sank in a few minutes. And tragically, 40 of the ferry passengers were lost. This ferry was very small, and I actually found a picture of it. And then finally, what brings us to why I'm talking about this was in 1930, this ship that I just told you went through all of these events from 1904 being built and surviving all of these various events, actually sank, luckily without loss of life, in the South Pacific Ocean because its propeller broke and they couldn't stop the flooding. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those events. And some of the mail that was salvaged and survived. And so that's why I'm giving you this little show and tell tonight. So an interesting life of this ship. And here again is the picture I showed on the front. This is the RMS Kingston. This picture is from about 1904 when it was first built and sailed. No, it's actually not from 1904. I think it is actually 1904 for my reference. And it was later renamed the Tahiti. I actually found a picture of the partial hull at upper right of the wreck of the ferry that was split in half that this ship had rammed with all those folks that had lost their lives. What was the route, the intended route, at least of this ship, the RMS Port Kingston, but really we're talking about the Tahiti. This was from Sydney, Australia, to do the Trans-Pacific route across the middle of nowhere to San Francisco. It had made stops in Wellington, Rarotonga, and we'll get to some details there. You know I like maps, so I'll show you a map, and Tahiti, and then it would continue on its way across the Pacific and stop in San Fran to then deliver mail to the U.S. and across the country. It's made its first voyage on December 11th in 1911. So I want to tell you about the flooding and the sinking before I get to actually showing you the cover, because this is, again, a very interesting event, and there were no lives lost, and I'll tell you why. Some other ships came to the rescue. Fortunately, they were not in the middle of the Pacific. That might have been a different story. As we'll see, August 12th, 1930, they were carrying 103 passengers, 149 crew, and 500 tons of cargo. It put to sea from Wellington, New Zealand, and it continued the voyage from Sydney to San Francisco. On the 15th, 3 days later, about 480 nautical miles southwest of Rarotonga, that's in the Cook Islands, I'll show you that, the propeller shaft broke. Large hole in the stern, rapid flooding. The crew sent out a distress call, launched distress signal rockets. They prepared the passengers for the possibility of abandoning ship, and then they fought the flooding. And as you'll see, everybody stayed on the ship. So they didn't get in their boats. They were preparing passengers. They thought they could stop the flooding. Fortunately, they sent out a distress call, and the next day, the Norwegian steamer, the SS Pembroke, arrived on scene to render assistance. It stood by the Tahiti throughout the night. It did not take anybody off. It just had floodlights illuminating Tahiti with their boats ready to go to the assistance of the passengers and crew if needed. So imagine you're on that ship and it's flooding and you're not getting off and you're sitting here waiting, but you're waiting. On the 17th, the next day, the next morning, the passengers and some of the crew abandoned ship with all the lifeboats away in 13 minutes. That's amazingly quick, and they got them all off. Some of their crew remained on to continue efforts. A second ship, the American steamer Ventura, arrived on scene, took the passengers and the crew soon after they abandoned ship. Members of Tahiti's crew, assisted by a boat from the Pembroke, returned to Tahiti, and they began efforts to save, and I underlined it, the first-class mails and passenger luggage. They specifically called that out in the history that I found of this event. So we know that they knew the mail was important. They got the mail. By 1:35 p.m., the Tahiti was settling rapidly. It was too dangerous for the crew to remain on board, and they abandoned ship. They saved the ship's papers and bullion, and at 4:42 p.m., without the loss of life, the SS Tahiti sank on August 17th, 1930, 2 days after its propeller broke, and they kept it afloat for as long as they could. So where were they? So here is a map of Oceania and the site sinking. And so here's an old atlas, Appleton & Co. from 1892. You know I like atlases and collect those as well. And so here is page 10 of that, and it shows Oceania. You could see at the lower left, there's Australia. You could see Indonesia above it, and then all of the islands surrounding there. And so if we get close, you can see all those South Pacific islands. I then zoom in on the Tonga Islands, then in the center, Niue, right, or Savage Islands, and then to the right, the Cook Islands. And you can see there the site of the sinking. This is very well documented. 24 degrees, 44 south, 166 degrees, 15 west. And there the green dot just above the Tropic of Capricorn, just southwest of Rarotonga, which you know is the largest island, the Cook Islands, and the capital there, which has the largest population on the islands, is where the ship was heading towards before then making its way to Tahiti and then up to San Fran. And so the ship sank. And luckily with those two ships that came to its rescue, there are photographs. And I was able to find photographs of the floundering SS Tahiti. You'll see it there at the upper left, floundering. You will see it there at the upper right. You can see the stern starting to get a little bit low there. You can also see the lifeboats with the passengers actually coming on board the American Ventura, and they are on the lower right as well. No lives were lost, crew or passengers. And bullion, luggage, and mail were rescued. And here is an artifact from this ship and from this sinking. Oh, I'll get to that. I also found images of the Norwegian steamer, which was the first to arrive, which salvaged the mail and cargo on the left. And then the American steamer Ventura, which was the second to arrive, which ended up taking all the passengers. And so that's a larger ship. You could see the passengers of that size would have been much more comfortable. They would have had more room to board them and then make their way to the United States. So now let's get to, and again, stop me anytime, please. So what did I find the other day when looking through an envelope? I found this cover salvaged from the SS Tahiti. It was sent from, and you could see it's a nice advertising, and there's a nice Jersey cattle. The New Zealand Jersey Cattle Breeders Association in Palmerston North. You can see it's canceled there, August 11th, 4 p.m., 1930, at Palmerstown North. And it was addressed to where? The manager at the Jersey Bulletin and Dairy World. So a magazine in Indianapolis, Indiana, in America. And note there right in the center, the 3-line purple hand stamp, salvaged from SS Tahiti, lost at sea. The inset there at the right is, I just cropped it and I did a little tweaking there of the contrast so you can just see it and read it. But this was mailed again August 30th. It was on board with a lot of other mail, and they did manage to rescue the mail. From some of the accounts I saw, the mail did get waterlogged. And so, you know, some pieces are more waterlogged than other. There were some pieces in some of the research I did that said that some of the stamps floated off, and some did not. So, but this is one of those. There's not many, and here's an example. Let me show you the back. The interesting thing about it, they salvaged the mail. Guess what? The cover made it to its final destination in Indianapolis. So you can see here, it made it to San Francisco. So if we go back, we know it was, sent on August 11th. We know the ship went down on the 17th. We know then that the mail was, recovered and eventually made its way to San Francisco on September 1st, 1930. Here is the receiver, San Francisco, double purple hand stamp, 1930. Here, you can't see it, but this is RECD, received. And then eventually traveled overland by rail, no doubt. Well, I don't think it flew. It had to take rail. And it made it to Indianapolis. 8 days later, you can see that receiver, Indianapolis, Indiana, September 9th, 9 a.m., 1930, received. And so whatever contents this was, a letter or maybe some advertising, or, the breeder just wanting to get maybe an article into the magazine talking about, whatever they're breeding, the Jersey cattle that they breed in New Zealand. We'll never know. There are no contents. But I just thought it was really interesting cover and an interesting story that this was salvaged. Along with this cover in the envelope that I found this in, which like I said, had not been looked at, was accompanying paperwork. And so left with this cover, was an article that appeared in the Stamp Collector by Everett C. Earl back in the 80s that described the tragic voyage of the Tahiti, that it produced salvage covers. And here is another example of a salvage cover at the lower left. Different cover, but there in the middle, just to the right, left of the stamp, you'll see the same 3-line hand stamp. Salvage from the SS Tahiti, lost at sea. Here at the upper right is actually this cover was sold at auction at the Gary Watson Public Auction Sale, number 42, 1988. listed as lot 1348, and the estimated value at the time was $250, $300, and it was sold because I got the letter, at least, and there's a 1984 letter who had described this, who actually put this up for consignment and auction from the original owner describing the sinking and or salvage in the days before internet, where you clearly had to not just search Google and pull it up, but did a bit of research on the text in the middle of that letter. And this person was at a time, at least Indiana University Southeast, John was his name. He wrote a fair amount and did a fair amount of research to actually find what had happened. So with this letter and some of the modern day research you can do just by signing searching SS Tahiti, you can get a lot of the information that I got and actually then find photographs, which I did. And so I just thought that was an interesting little cover to share about, again, you never know what you're going to find in a little envelope that looked unassuming. And in that envelope was all of this material and this little cover. And then by taking a few minutes, maybe an hour or so, was able to do a search and find photos of the event and where they went down and the entire timeline and the history, even a little bit more about this ship. And where it served and what it did and the life story of those folks that were on it. So I thought I would just share that as part of my show and tell, and I'll take any questions if you have any. So thanks for your 5 minutes of time. Thank you, everybody.
Very nice.
Any questions?
Charlie?
Yeah, sure.
Towards the top right, there looks to be another cancel of some kind in purple.
Yes. So interesting. And I'm pulling this cover back out and I'm looking at that because I don't know if this was, a prepaid mark or some sort of metering, because it doesn't look like there was a stamp on there that might have fallen off, or though some of the mail that I read on from the salvage got waterlogged and the stamps came off. This, to me, as I look at it, and I probably have to put it under higher power and a brighter light, maybe my 30, and then you're right. There is absolutely sort of what looks like a purple hand stamp there. And the fact that the black marking from Palmerstown, which is canceled there August 11th, 4 p.m. 1930, goes all the way across the top. If there was a stamp, it doesn't look like there was a stamp there because that ink, if that was a cancel over the stamp, would have been missing. Right?
This is the roller cancel.
Yeah, right. So I think that's just it, right? And that would have been enough. Is that right, Dick? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but where's the stamp?
Well, so I'm saying maybe that's not a stamp, and what is actually some sort of prepaid postage, maybe if this was a circular or some other advertising.
That's just advertisement. It says even if you miss the mail, there's still a telephone.
Yeah.
It's just an advertisement.
Yeah.
It's just a roller. It's just a roller cancel, but there's no evidence of a stamp ever being on it.
Yeah, that's right. So
if there was a stamp, that would have been over it, and there'd have been a blank spot.
Yeah, that's right. Or if it was at the bottom right, there's some empty space, or if it was at the lower left below the jersey cap. I don't know. I just don't see it.
Yeah. It's possible there's been a stamp in the lower right, and they just missed it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely possible. Listen, we know that they miss stamps from time to time.
Reverse, Charlie.
Yeah, give me some feedback. Sure, go ahead.
Go to the
what's on the backside?
Yeah, the reverse. Yeah.
Is that?
Are you looking here in the middle at that red stain?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, right? So if you go back to 1930 and I look at my New Zealand collection of stamps and what was being issued at that time, there are a couple, and I can try to pull one out from my book and try to see if I can fit it there.
That's probably just a transfer of something that was up against it when it was all wet.
Absolutely, that is possible.
Could be.
Yeah, and so that is possible. But yes, so I thought this was interesting because I think at least you're right from a postage perspective. I'm having a hard time trying to explain what might have been on there and how it was paid. Although, at that time too, in 1926, they did release that issue, that stamp, and I've just pulled out the book, that was completely Carmen, that small little head, the king head. So, I mean, it's possible that would fit there, but it could be a transfer from, the cover that it was, pressed up against when they just collected all the mail. That's probably the issue there.
Charlie, you never know how much fun you can have when you open an envelope that nobody else has seen.
Yeah, well, exactly. So this clearly was sitting, and I know where I got this and where it was in a box, clearly since 1988 that auction was from, if I go back to, so that auction was from 88. And the envelope was dated 88, and it was registered and certified. And this was just buried in there with a random set of papers, of other papers, not even postal paper, just general papers and receipts, and in there was this envelope in the original U.S. mailed envelope from the auction house with all of this stuff in it and the cover. And so again, I go back to what I think we heard a couple weeks ago, and I think that was George. You never know what you'll find in an envelope. Here we go. Here's a really interesting story of a salvage cover from this sinking ship. And so, you know, I put some more feelers out there to get a feel. I contacted our friend Scott Treppel at Siegel just to get a feel if he's ever moved any of these before, to get a feel for sort of current value, who's interested in these. And so I just thought I would share it because, again, I like to go down these rabbit holes and kind of do a little research. And it does show you I do things more than just plating the 3-cent 1851 issue. I will